In progress. Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Morton, and this is my world. Welcome to the Sean David Morton experience. Dr. Sean David Morton, PhD. So while people are joining us, this is going to be a talk about the future. Let me see what I was. Let me see. I'm going to give you the exact. All right, we're going to talk about the doomsday clock. Let me see. So, prophecy no more. Why is the future so many in the past have predicted all falling apart? And is that good or evil? Nostradamus, Mother Shrimpton, EDGAR CAYCE, Elizabeth Clear Prophet, Gordon Scallion, the Great Pyramid, even the Bible, all have recently been spectacularly wrong. All except the most accurate and successful futurists of the 20th and 21st century. That would be me. Yes, he's back and better than ever. All right. We're talking about super science. We're talking about time technology to alter timelines, change our future to change it to what? And is the culling of the human race about to happen? Or will something step in to stop it? How does the use of coming artificial intelligence threaten us all? And how will the engineered collapse of the United States about to come about? And go into depth on the PALMA volcano, which I actually went into yesterday. The East Coast, the PLUTO CYCLE dates, and how they will affect America and the world. Chemtrails for phase 1 of a global VAX conspiracy. Okay. All right, there you go. So I'm going to try to hit all the points that I talked about in the advertisement. And but first, let me see. Am I on here? Let me see. Am I good to go? Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's some quotes to consider. I'm sorry, but the moment has moved me to make some comments about what's going on in Ukraine, because Ukraine quite possibly could be the trigger point of a third world war, or a fourth world war, if you want to look at Desert Storm and all the nations that aligned themselves against Iraq happening. And of course, due to the complete incompetence of the Biden administration, Russia is now moving ahead with allowing Iran to get nuclear weapons. But here's some quotes to consider. Vladimir Putin is public enemy #1 to the New World Order. That was said by Nathaniel Rothschild. I will strangle the New World Order with my bare hands if necessary. That was Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin also said, President Trump, please, before you leave office, consider releasing everything you know about 9/11, also about the 27 alien races we are currently aware of, 3 of which are actively trying to destroy us. This is Vladimir Putin. Now, I'm getting increasingly impatient and angry with the alt.right.com media that is out there. And even Fox News, which is usually the closest to reporting real stories, is slathering at the jaws for World War III and a hot war with Russia, which has the potential of killing 1 billion people, especially if they melt down Chernobyl. Now, again, I talked about this yesterday. I'm not sure how many people tuned in for that, but I sat next to oddly enough, a Russian nuclear expert on a plane. And he was telling me all about Chernobyl. And Chernobyl, oddly enough, in biblical prophecy, translates as wormwood in Russian. And for those of you who know a little bit about Revelation and a little bit about the end times, wormwood is particularly interesting because it talks about the wormwood star, which would come from the heavens, and that it would actually poison 1/3 of the water on the planets. Now, it's interesting to me because Chernobyl may not be a star that comes from the sky, but Chernobyl does sit on top of a gigantic aquifer of water that feeds the majority of Europe. And we're talking about 1/3 of the people on the planet. That might not be true as far as Europe goes. But let's say Chernobyl was to melt down. Let's say that they were to hit it with a missile or even sabotage it, the Ukrainians themselves, which they've been doing, and blaming it on the Russians. That if this went into a China syndrome meltdown, meaning that nothing could stop this nuclear material from just burning its way through the earth all the way to China, supposedly it would hit this aquifer of water. 1, it would poison the aquifer, and 2, it would create a gigantic explosion, creating a devastation zone of several hundred miles. And this was the thing that this Russian nuclear expert was worried about. And this was quite some time ago when Chernobyl was going hot, and when it was really activating. So please take the time to compare the evidence and the analysis of the Ukraine conflict that I'm going to present. You've had people like Ben Fulford out there as an example. I like Ben. I've had Ben on my radio show, but his misleading, unsubstantiated claims of ETs, Nasara, Gisara, Project Bluebeam, leprechauns, unicorns. I mean, the children's fairy tale named the White Dragon Society, all of whom are going to come in and save us all, including Trump, by the way. That Trump is somehow going to save us when people don't realize that it's Trump that got us into this multi-trillion-dollar hole that we're in. It's Trump that sicked Dr. Fauci and the scarf lady on you. It's Trump that conducted his completely bogus Operation Warp Speed. It's Trump that allowed them to completely steal the election and thwart the will of the people and did nothing about it. But that all our evil leaders have been basically hung at Gitmo and replaced with clones who were worse than the originals and apparently still poop their pants while meeting with the Pope, who is apparently now a hologram anyway. So this is what you're being told by the alt-right, by the Ben Fulfords, by the Wano Savins, by the various people who have amassed this ginormous cult following out there. In addition, I think upon careful analysis, you might agree that Ben Fulford is part of an operation to draw attention away from the likes of reasonable national intelligent people like F. William Engdahl, because as I have said for years, then the world and the current events and possibility of altering and making history for the better becomes not only more comprehensible, but even more likely, but only likely once fantasies that the white unicorns or the White Dragon Society are all going to move in and save us, and that somehow some Chinese conspiracy of Taoist masters is going to move in and hang all the New World Order guys. Now we have to think like Beethoven, so to speak. So genius can be taught. We might change history, but to do so, I argue that we have to set aside our time and attention for the very best minds of our time and forego cartoonish summaries. So finally, Ben Fulford's use of the Khazarian Mafia, which is a code word for evildoer, is less than adequate. We face an apostate, perverse, descending, devolving humanity at large, and our leaders today are the worst of the worst of all of them. As a matter of fact, even the Bible warned us that if you have somebody who wants power, that's the person that you should desperately not give it to. So we've got to inspire those that would and are still capable of turning and creating a vocabulary in their own way that God and Buddha are trying to tell us the real human enemy is materialism, Satanism, which is just another religious manifestation of that materialism, oligarchism, and yes, a Jewish mafia that is not Jewish as described by Revelation 3:7-13. Therein, the only Revelations church that is not rebuked is supposedly the Church of Philadelphia, which is who Paul writes in his epistles, and is told that even the synagogue of not Jews will not only be powerless before the righteous, who are the character of the Church of Philadelphia, but are soundly chastised as followers, or as follows is what it says, quote, behold, unwavering faith and remain courageous in preaching the word that man is created in the living image of God, and while mired in sin is redeemable through the word, accordingly with a contrite heart asking for forgiveness and receiving it, it is possible to turn back apostates, the Satanists, the materialism, and even apostate Jewish banking cartels, Fulford's Khazarian Mafia, but only with Christ, Buddha, and certainly not by fantasies that sound like they came from out of a comic book. There's little evidence that a White Dragon Society actually exists, except for Ben Fulford's posts and interviews. But there's plenty, as you full well know, that the god Christ or Buddha and what Asia calls the Buddha is not only very real, but knowable, and in some, the key to the salvation of our apparent impotence. It's also no coincidence whatsoever that Vladimir Putin has the knowledge and the wherewithal to start this war on February 22nd, 24th of 2022 at the exact time that Pluto goes to 27 degrees Capricorn in the astrological chart of the United States, when we would be at our weakest and the beginning of the destruction of our nation would begin, as these transits last through December of 2024. Actually, the great revelation of when Pluto moves finally out of Capricorn and moves finally into Aquarius for about 18 years happens on Christmas Eve of 2024. But I've been predicting disaster for the USA in this time period for years, and that by 2025, this nation will never be the same. And you're seeing it dismantled. You're seeing the influence of amazingly evil people, demonic monsters like George Soros, who has gone from city to city and replaced attorney generals to allow criminals to roam free on our streets, to go unpunished, to go unimprisoned. They've murdered, they've robbed, they've raped, they've beaten, they've mugged, all because of all because of what's going on. Now, Ukraine is part of a deeper global suicide agenda. And the decision by the Russian president to order military action in Ukraine beginning in February has shocked a lot of people, myself included. And the question at this point, almost a month now into military action by Russian and other forces inside Ukraine, is what pushed Russia into what Western media portrays as a unilateral, unwarranted war of aggression. Of course, that's what the media is telling you. This is what, and Fox News is just as bad. I mean, Fox News, which is usually fairly fair and balanced, and the only place you can really get fair and balanced anymore is a comedy show like Greg Gutfeld, who has the show Gutfeld Late at Night, which has greater ratings than Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon.
Her co-host, nothing. So she told everybody that Sean was in room 11 on the chat.
Okay.
So we have some people that don't belong. I can't get rid of those people. I know what to do. I have to pay Sean who's in there.
Okay. Hello?
And then.
Hello? Okay. All right. Your mic is hot.
You're supposed to be in there. I try to move them. I move them, and this is not showing.
Okay. I'm sorry. That's Mark Becker that you hear doing something. Mark, okay. You might want to mute your microphones or something. Anyway, so
let me just make an announcement. Is there anybody in
Okay.
here, anybody who hasn't made bought your session? That is what Mark is saying. Please, this is an extra bonus session and you have to pay for it. So if anybody is listening right now, if you don't have a SM in front of your name, Kimberly, Adeline, please, you need to send your contribution to Mark at newlifemag.com. Okay. So, or else Mark is going to kick you out. If you want to stay in, there is a contribution to Sean. Okay, thank you.
It doesn't go to me. It's not a contribution to Sean. It doesn't. I'm not getting paid for this at all.
Well, he apparently wants to. So
okay, that'd be great. That'd be great. Usually I get a trip. I thought I'd be going to Long Island.
Sean,
so,
don't say that. Don't ever say that, because you are getting paid for the work.
I am. Okay, I'm sorry. I ladies and gentlemen, yes, I'm actually getting remunerated for my time. Yes, I am. Okay, so continuing forward.
For it, please leave the room. Thank you.
There's a lot of time. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot of volunteers. There's a lot of people who make this happen, and none of it happens for free. So Mark is providing an amazing service to all of you in a very difficult time when things in New York are just crazy. They still have mask mandates in certain places. Actually, I think your mayor just removed them for everybody except little kids and babies, I guess, have to wear masks too. So it's all just ridiculous. So anyway, so All right. So what pushed Russia into a war? And again, let me point out that man, this is going to be unpopular. Every single time there's been a war situation, every single time that Russia could have reacted, every single time that you could have had literally World War III with the United States going up against Russia in places like Syria, in places like former Soviet Georgia, in places like, well, all over the place. Vladimir Putin has been the peacemaker. Vladimir Putin, for example, in Syria, not only did Putin move in and assist the Assad regime, but he did so to keep radical Muslims from taking over Syria and slaughtering over 100,000 Christians in the country. At the same time, the United States was using a bogus series of threats against Bashar, claiming that Bashar was going to be using sarin gas on his own people. And John Kerry stood up, and it was interesting because Kerry stood up and said, "Oh, we've got this gas, they've got the gas," and he says, "We can prove it." And the Russians are the ones that set up and said, "Okay, prove it. Prove it. We're going to put your feet against the fire. We want you to prove it." And it turns out not only could they not prove it, but one of the bombs actually exploded in the face of the terrorists, not Bashar and not his forces, but they found out that the terrorists themselves were actually the ones that were providing the bombs, that had the gas. And of course, when it blew up like an exploding cigar in their faces, and they got caught red-handed, not only with the bombs and the gas, but the Russians managed to defuse the entire situation in Syria. And I think it's funny that people are talking about how Russia is overreacting. And what is it the United States actually did in Syria? What did the United States do in Iraq? What did the United States do in Afghanistan? How did the United States completely destroy, unethically and illegally, along with NATO, Libya, turning Libya now into a terrorist hellhole, where most of the children of Libya, because the population was 75% of the population of Libya was under 30. And those women have been turned into slaves. The men have been turned into terrorists, all thanks to Hillary Clinton. And, it goes way beyond Benghazi when it has to do with that. And so the United States has not only been overreacting, but has been basically stomping around the world, murdering people. And Donald Trump met with a number of his generals underground in the Situation Room. This is when I think Tillerson was Secretary of State. And they were talking about how Trump was stupid, and that he was childlike, and that he was naive, and that we had to continue in Afghanistan, we had to continue in Iraq, we had to continue all of these crazy wars. And Trump basically stood up and said, "Look, since 9/11, you people have killed 27 million people. That's how many people died in the Middle East. We're talking about Iraq. We're talking about, almost 500,000 children in Iraq. We're talking about Libya. We're talking about Afghanistan." He said, since 2001. And since 2011, which Trump knows is fake and was a complete hoax that was probably pulled off by the intelligence agencies under the direction of the Vatican in order to get a war against Islam, the United States and the Obama and Bush administration have killed 27 million people. They killed not only all those people, but they spent about $8 trillion on a war that went nowhere, that did nothing. I mean, again, Afghanistan, the way we got out was disgusting and despicable and disorganized, and also left the Taliban as one of the most armed countries on the planet. But it's just crazy. So and now Trump was complaining about the fact that he couldn't even get $1 trillion to build a road, or to build his wall with Mexico, or to build any kind of border whatsoever to protect the borders of the United States. And so what drove Russia, who has not only been, and Putin, who has not only been a peacemaker this entire time, as I said, matter of fact, when the United States and Israel attacked Georgia, it was Putin who was yelling and screaming at Bush when he was drunk off his ass, watching women's volleyball at the Olympics in Beijing. And there was video of Putin like yelling and screaming at Bush about, what are you trying to do? How are you trying to start World War III? And all the Russians did was move into Georgia and repel the attack of the Israelis and the Israelis and the United States. They could have moved in and taken all of Georgia if they wanted to, and they did not. The same thing was true with Crimea. Crimea is traditionally ethnically Russian. They all speak Russian, and they keep talking about how Russia somehow illegally annexed Crimea. That is not what happened. What happened was the Crimeans voted and there was a legitimate vote, not rigged like the votes are in our country, but 96% of the people in Crimea all voted to become part of the Russian bloc. So Donetsk and the areas, or the Danub as it's called, which again are all traditionally Russian, have been brutalized in genocidal cleansing by the Zelensky regime, and they had asked the Russians to come in and help them. So they were a legitimate, or are a legitimate republic, who did request the Russians to come in an area that is still legally, according to the UN, according to Hague and everything else, still belongs to Russia. So theoretically, this is an internal conflict, and Ukraine is not a country. Ukraine refused to actually list its borders with the United Nations when they became independent from the Soviet bloc countries in 1991. So in essence, what you're dealing with is what appears to be a civil war or a civil action. And now they're talking about, you've got crazy people in Congress saying the United States needs to put up a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would eventually lead to shooting down Russian planes. The Russians have about 6,000 nuclear weapons. And this is probably why Kennedy was so reluctant to take action against Cuba way back in the day, because he knew that there were nukes in Cuba, and those nukes could hit Miami within, I don't know, under 20 minutes or so, traveling the 90 miles to there. But what exactly pushed Russia, which had been peaceful up to this time, into what Western media portrays as unilateral, unwarranted war of aggression? There was a public threat by Ukrainian president, comedian, and crossdresser Volodymyr Zelensky. And this was on February 19th during meetings with top-level NATO officials and others in the annual Munich Security Conference, which provides a largely ignored clue to Moscow's actions. And in addition, more recent reports of numerous US Pentagon bioweapons labs, 30 of them, by the way, which were described as right-wing propaganda and things that Tucker Carlson was making up on Fox News. Well, guess what? About 4 or 5 days ago, Tory, or Victoria Nuland, who was the architect of the overthrow of the legitimately elected government in Ukraine to put in this neo-Nazi cross-dressing comedian scumbag Zelensky, she admitted, under questioning by Senator Marco Rubio, yes, the United States has about 30 bioweapons labs in the Ukraine. Now, the CNN people wanted to play it off by just saying, oh, well, they were just where we were researching stuff. Well, Victoria Nuland was so terrified that the Russians would get their hands on these bioweapons labs. And now they're telling you in the main news that the Russians are going in hazmat suits because they're going to deploy biological weapons. Gee, doesn't that sound like a wagging the dog sort of thing, where it's probably going to be the United States that actually deploys these bioweapons? Because you have to remember that the New World Order is going to stop at nothing. What Putin is doing is he's chopping off the head of the Hydra. He's closing down their bank accounts. I'm worried Hunter Biden's going to overdose on crack because all of his checks are going to stop from Seneca and Burisma. And does anybody remember the comment by Biden that they were investigating his son, Hunter Biden, and that he threatened them and said, you're not going to get $1 billion in U.S. aid in American tax dollars if this prosecutor who was investigating him and his skullduggery and his scummy dealings in the Ukraine wasn't fired? And then he laughed and said, by the end of the day, that guy was fired. Nobody questions that anymore. So once again, February 19th, Zelensky comes in and he reports that there are U.S. Pentagon bioweapons labs across the Ukraine, which then add to the background threats. But did Moscow believe Russia faced a literal do or die reality? Because what Zelensky promised to do at that meeting with the top level NATO officials and others at the Munich Society Conference was not only possibly use bioweapons against the Russians, but that they were going to park nuclear weapons pointed at Moscow in Ukraine. So the current conflict in Ukraine had its seeds in the 1990s and the US-backed collapse of the Soviet Union. So during the high-level 2+4 treaty talks pertaining to Germany's reunification, this was after the Soviet Union went bankrupt. And after they went bankrupt, the Berlin Wall, they couldn't afford the Berlin Wall anymore. They went completely bankrupt. I'm not sure if people realize this or not, but pertaining to Germany's reunification in 1990, there were talks between U.S. Secretary of State James Baker III and then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, along with France, the United Kingdom, and the West German government over unification of Germany. Baker gave a verbal promise, which became known as the Baker Treaties, I guess you could call it. But he said if the Soviets were to move back, that NATO would not move 1 inch, was his exact quote. NATO won't move 1 inch to the east to threaten former Soviet territories. And in return, the USSR will allow German reunification within NATO. So for years, Washington has lied about this exchange as they moved one after the other former Warsaw Pact countries, including Poland, the Czech Republic, Romania, Hungary, Baltic states, into NATO, and closer to striking distance to Russia. So recently, Putin cited the 1990 Baker Agreement of not moving an inch towards Russia to justify Russian demands that NATO and Washington give binding legal assurances that demands that NATO and Washington, that Ukraine would never be admitted to the NATO alliance, and Washington until now has categorically refused to do so. So at the 2007 annual Munich Security Conference, as the Bush-Cheney administration had announced plans to install U.S. missile defense systems in Poland. Now, remember, the Russians had pulled back all their missile defense out of Eastern Europe. They pulled all of it back, and the minute they pulled it back, the United States rushed in with its short-range missile defense. This led Putin to say, I'm trying to make peace. I haven't anybody to talk to since Gandhi died. And every time I make peace, George Bush rushes in like a crazy man, slashing everybody with a razor. I think that was a pretty good analogy. So suddenly they move nuclear missile defense systems into Poland, Romania, the Czech Republic to, quote, guard against rogue states such as North Korea or Iran. Again, this is Eastern Europe, but guarding against rogue states like North Korea and Iran. So Putin delivered a scathing critique of the U.S. lies and the violation of their 1990 assurances on NATO. And by that time, 10 former communist Eastern states had been admitted to NATO, despite the 1990 U.S. promises. And furthermore, both Ukraine and Georgia were candidates to join NATO following U.S.-led color revolutions, most of which were led by George Soros, by the way. And George Soros is in the process of actually leading a color revolution in this country, the Purple Revolution, because you'll notice after the Democrats lost to Trump, everybody started wearing purple. They started wearing purple ties. You had a purple blouse on Hillary. You had Bill in a purple tie. You had Schumer in a purple tie. You even had suits that had purple lapels on them. This is part of Soros's color revolution, that everybody gets behind this color to be able to completely destabilize the current government, to replace it with a more totalitarian system, which is what happened in these color revolution countries, in both countries, in 2003 and 2004. Putin rightly argued that the U.S. missiles were aimed at Russia, not North Korea, and not Iran, because they were right in Russia's backyard. If the United States and Russia, if Russia had done 20% of the things that we're talking about on the Mexican border, which is, by the way, completely out of control. I don't know if you know this, but a couple of nights ago, there was a massive firefight between a number of cartels right across the border from Texas. And the United States is not doing anything about it, which means that the 2-some million people that have now oozed into the United States, storming the southern border, which are then distributed across the United States at night in aircraft paid for by the federal government, where they're deposited in mostly red states and red communities, causing complete chaos all across the United States. And this is the change that the Democrats are promising you, that they're going to allow all these people in from other countries. All of them are going to come in from other countries. All of them, they're going to be placed in, I guess, what you would call purple states, to be able to, given Social Security cards, so that they can then borrow against those cards to start paying for the debt, because that's what they borrow against, whether you know it or not. Each Social Security card has some red numbers on the back. That's actually a bond number that allows them to borrow money against that card. And by the way, Social Security cards are issued by the Commerce Department, not the Social Security Administration. The Commerce Department. So if the Commerce Department takes 2 million new citizens in, issues all of them SSNs, Social Security numbers, they can then borrow against the bonds on the number on the back of the card, you'll see if you take out your social security card, there should be red numbers on the back, which start with a letter, and they start from A through L. And those are the 12 Federal Reserve banks. L is San Francisco, by the way, the last of the Federal Reserve banks that was established. And you belong to that crime family. You now become the chattel, the cattle, the goy, if you will, which is what goyim actually translates into. It translates as cattle of that particular crime family that owns those particular banks. So in this, when Putin made his remarks to his Western audience, he says, it turns out, this was Putin talking now, it turns out that NATO has put its frontline forces on our borders, and we cannot continue to strictly fulfill the treaty obligations and do not react to these actions at all. I think it is obvious that NATO expansion does not have any relation with the modernization of the alliance itself or with ensuring security in Europe. On the contrary, it represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust, and we have the right to ask, against whom is this expansion intended? And what happened to the assurances our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? Where are those declarations today? No one even remembers them. Now, Putin added to this, but I will allow myself to remind this audience that of what was said. I would like to quote the speech of NATO General Secretary Mr. Warner in Brussels on 17 May 1990. He said at the time that, quote, the fact that we are ready not to place a NATO army outside of German territory gives the Soviet Union a firm security guarantee. So where are those guarantees? This was 15 years ago, to give you an idea of why this is happening. And again, could possibly be a trigger for nuclear war, which could result in the culling of about 1 billion people. So by November of 2013, an economically corrupt and floundering Ukraine under elected and also very corrupt President Viktor Yanukovyc, he was known as I think the chocolate czar. He announced that rather than accept a special association with the EU, that Ukraine would take a far more generous offer from Moscow to join the Eurasian Economic Union, which was led by Moscow. Well, Russia had agreed to cut the price of Russian gas to Ukraine by 30% and to buy 15 billion of Ukrainian bonds to ease the Kiev financial crisis. Now, by the way, the spelling of Kiev was K-I-E-V. Now it's K-Y-V. They're pronouncing it Kiev. They're pronouncing it Kev. I'm not sure. I haven't contacted a Ukrainian to say, how is it you say Kiev and why are they saying it different now? Like it's a different place on earth or something. And so at that point, on the 21st of November, Arseny Yatsenyuk was the man selected by Washington's Victoria Nuland, who's, by the way, now back in charge of this particular conflict, and Kiev ambassador Jeffrey Pratt. And together with then Vice President Joe Biden, they launched what was called the Maiden Square protests against Yanukovyc regime backed by the US NGOs. And on February 20th of 2014, after CIA organized snipers reportedly recruited from nearby Georgia, killed dozens of student protesters and also police, leading Yanukovyc to flee, Yatsenyuk became prime minister in a hand-picked US-run regime, hand-picked by Victoria Nuland and Joe Biden, among others, to establish the corruption that they now have in the Ukraine, which opened things wide open for Joe Biden's son Hunter to work for Burisma Oil and another company called Seneca, where he's now pocketed millions of dollars and was paid, I don't know, 100,000 a month or something for a job that he was completely unqualified for. So later, back in December of 2014, in an interview with a Russian newspaper, George Friedman of a company called Stratfor, and by the way, Stratfor is it's an Israeli intelligence company, basically, that provides Alex Jones with a lot of his somewhat bogus intelligence. But a private firm consulting to the Pentagon and CIA, among others, said of the US-led February 2014 Kiev regime change, quote, Russia calls the events that took place in the beginning of this year a coup d'etat organized by the United States, and it truly was the most blatant coup in history. And he was boastful in this interview. So that Kiev coup regime proceeded after February 22nd of 2014 to wage a war of extermination and ethnic cleansing of Russian-speaking citizens in eastern Ukraine in what's called the Donetsk or Donetsk region, and led to a large degree by a private army of literal neo-Nazis from right sector, which is banned in Russia, by the way, the same ones who ran security in the Maiden Square and launched a reign of terror against Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Battalions were formed of neo-Nazi mercenaries. They were given official state status as Ukrainian National Guard. So imagine the Ku Klux Klan moving into your city or your state and suddenly being made the National Guard by Governor Gruesome Newsom here in California. But they were given official state status. And what's called the Azov Battalion, which was financed by Ukrainian mafia boss and billionaire oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky, the financial backer of Zelensky as president. The Azov soldiers even sport open SS runes on its logo. And in 2016, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights accused the Azov Battalion, officially upgraded to a regiment in January of 2015, of committing war crimes such as mass looting, unlawful detention, and torture. Let me point out that when Zelensky gave his speech the other day to the United States Congress, where he received a standing ovation, he was wearing a Nazi Iron Cross. He had a green shirt on with a Nazi Iron Cross on the breast, which I just thought, and this neo-Nazi comedian cross-dressing scumbag is addressing the Congress, and every single one of those corrupt bastards, Republicans and Democrats, and anybody who thinks the Republicans are going to save them in the next election has got another thing coming, because they're just as behind this as the Democrats are. But today, Nuland is Biden's Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, responsible for Ukraine and Russia affairs, and she's well aware of who the Azov Battalion are and their neo-Nazi affiliations. So on February 19th in Munich, Ukrainian President Zelensky made his threat to deploy nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. This was this last year. And he said he was going to bring in nukes. Not only was they were talking about joining NATO, but they were going to bring in nuclear weapons. And this is no different than the Soviet Union putting nuclear weapons in Cuba, which of course almost led to World War III back then. Let me give you some background on that. Interestingly enough, Kennedy knew all about the nuclear weapons in Cuba, knew they were there, and knew that they had been there for some period of time. This is quite possibly the reason why, when the Bay of Pigs operation was aborted, and this was an operation completely lock, stock, and barrel by the CIA to get Cuban freedom fighters into Cuba to topple Castro, then tell the president of the United States about it, then get them in a jam to force Kennedy to bring in air cover and aircrafts and whatever else. And the primary reason Kennedy said no was, one, he was left out of the loop. Two, this whole thing was done by the CIA. Three, it was done to make him look stupid. And four, he knew that the Russians had nuclear weapons there. And if anybody wants to read an interesting book on kind of a bridge or a span of topics, you've got to read it. It's one, along with my books, the Sands of Time books, which are backup, by the way. Sands of Time is backup on Amazon. So we'll be taking orders for them, but go to Amazon.com, go to Sands of Time. You can email me also at Sean Morton 777 at gmail.com, and you can order the books directly. But Amazon.com is up there. Like I said, we're allowing about 3 weeks for delivery, but you can get all three of the books, and Time Runner is going to be up pretty soon. But it was Colonel Philip Corso, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, who wrote the book The Day After Roswell. And Philip Corso was the military governor of Italy. He was in charge of all of Italy after the war. And he later became the right-hand person to General Arthur Trudeau and was responsible for disseminating all of the technology that came out of the crash at Roswell. The book is called The Day After Roswell. Part of the book that you may or may not notice is that they had photographs of the Soviet missile silos in Cuba, and they knew that Kennedy knew about it and that Kennedy wasn't doing a thing about it. And they saw this as a direct threat to the foreign and domestic peace of the United States. It was Lieutenant Philip Corso that actually handed the photographs to the Boston Globe that then embarrassed Kennedy into actually doing something about it. Kennedy let the communists build the Berlin Wall. Kennedy let the communists move Soviet missiles into Cuba. Kennedy allowed all of this to happen, and it wasn't until he and his administration were exposed and were embarrassed by it that anything actually happened. So tell me how the Russians putting Soviet missiles in Cuba 90 miles off our shore is any different from Zelensky's promise of putting nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which is literally on the border with Russia, which would be like the Soviets putting nuclear missiles in downtown Tijuana or Juarez as an example. So once again, February 19th in Munich, this is just this last month, Zelensky made his threat to deploy nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. And this was at the Munich conference in front of the entire world. And he expressed this as his unilateral revocation of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, although Ukraine was not a signatory on that agreement, was not a member of NATO, had still not declared its borders, the eastern sections of which still belong to Russia. And 2 days later, on the evening of February 21st, Vladimir Putin made his speech recognizing the sovereign independence of the Donetsk and of the Lugansk People's Republic, all of which are Russian speaking and former citizens of the Soviet Union. And he explicitly referenced Zelensky's Munich nuclear weapons pledge, quote, "This is not empty bravado." And Putin stressed this in his speech, that he believed that Zelensky was dead serious about putting nuclear weapons in the Ukraine, along with the 30 bioweapons labs creating biochemical weapons, all on the dime of the taxpayers of the United States. So on March 6th, Moscow State News Agency, RAI Novosti, quoted a senior Russian SVR foreign intelligence source with details on a secret Ukrainian project, reportedly with vital covert Western support, to build a Ukrainian nuclear missile capability and a Ukrainian atom bomb in brazen violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, making Ukraine one of the 6 countries in the world that now has nuclear weapons. The Ukrainians, they were going to give nuclear weapons, because they export wheat and supermodels, apparently. And now they're going to have an atomic bomb. But according to the report, Ukrainian nuclear scientists were discussing the developments by locating them near the high radiation levels of Chernobyl's nuclear reactor site, which was an explanation for the swift Russian move to secure Chernobyl. This is why they not only were they moving into Chernobyl because it's the point of attack for the sex trade. So it's white sex slavery, child slavery. Adrenochrome is actually coming out of there, which they're extracting from children who they terrify first and torture for a period of time. So the adrenochrome levels get higher, so that Nancy Pelosi can live a longer life. But that's one of the reasons why they moved so quickly to secure Chernobyl, not only as a nuclear facility, but because they were moving nuclear weapons facilities there to hide it from Russian satellites because of the high radiation levels there at Chernobyl. So by doing this, an explanation for the swift Russian moves, it was there, judging by the available information, that work was underway both on the manufacture of a dirty nuclear bomb and on the separation of plutonium. This was RAI Novosti quotes the source. The primary bomb research facility was located at the National Scientific Center at the Kharkov Institute of Physics and Technology, where they were developing atomic weapons to use against Russia. As of now, reports of the fierce fighting underway between Russian forces and the neo-Nazi Ukrainian Azov fighters who reportedly were planning to blow up the research reactor site and then blame it on Russia. This is one of the reasons why they were saying, oh, Russia's closing in on Chernobyl and whatever else. But the battle for control of the large nuclear power plant, which is called the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is also apparently part of the attempt to conceal the illegal Ukrainian atomic bomb project. So it now begins to become more clear that Putin had serious reason to react at the threat of Zelensky claiming that he was going to put a nuclear bomb right on Russia's border and pointed at Moscow. A Ukrainian nuclear missile within 6 minutes of Moscow would present an existential danger whether Ukraine were in NATO or not. And this was recognized by the Russians and recognized by Vladimir Putin. So, does this huge military buildup and does biowarfare and does the development of an atomic weapon on the borders of Russia, is that excuse enough for Putin to do what he's doing? So there was more. I mean, there's a lot more to this story. Ukrainian press reported a year ago about new Western-built de facto NATO naval bases in Ochakov and Berdyansk as, quote, modern infrastructure facilities capable of receiving ships of all types, equipped according to NATO standards and built with the money of the alliance countries. Does that sound like joining NATO? And the media boasted, quote, in 3 years, we will be able to strike at Russian ships in the Black Sea with our Mosquito fleet. And if we combine with Georgia and Turkey, the Russian Federation will be blocked. Ukrainian military experts boasted. Again, threatening Russia, where Russia pulled out of Ukraine, said, we're going to let these people be free only under the condition that it stay neutral, that you not have weapons built up there, and that they don't point them at us. So, in addition, the US Pentagon had no less than 8, perhaps as many as 30 top secret bioweapons research labs across Ukraine. We now know it's 30 because Victoria Nuland, under oath in Congress to Marco Rubio, admitted that we have 30 bioweapons labs after everybody in the mainstream media, Morton Joe and all the women on The View, which again, is The View just designed to perform a frontal lobotomy on you? So after they told you it was all a hoax and Fox was making it up or Tucker Carlson was making it up, whatever, you have Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of Defense, basically of State, telling you that they're there and that they're developing, that they were just research facilities, but we're terrified. We're terrified that the Russians are going to get hold of them, because if the Russians got hold of them, there'd be real trouble. Why? If they're just storing things, if they're just doing things that's just completely humanitarian, and we're just doing research. So the Pentagon had no less than 8, perhaps as many as 30. They have 30 bio secret weapons laboratories, research labs across the Ukraine, testing DNA of some 4,000 military volunteers. And once Russian soldiers moved to secure the evidence, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev deleted previous mention of the sites. Matter of fact, they just trashed everything they had at the U.S. Embassy, throwing everything away, crushing everything. Boy, those shredder machines were working overtime. And they deleted all the previous mention of the sites from their website, and Ukrainians reportedly moved to destroy the lab evidence. Ukrainian labs in Kharkiv and elsewhere were operating in cooperation with the United States. Stocks of such weapons were being secretly stored in direct violation of international conventions. So a full month before the Russian military action on 24 February in Ukraine, independent biowarfare researcher Dilana Gaitanziev obtained documents detailing, quote, right here, I'll read the quote. U.S. Pentagon biological experiments with a potentially lethal outcome on 4,400 soldiers in Ukraine and 1,000 soldiers in Georgia. According to the leaked documents, all volunteer deaths should be reported within 24 hours in Ukraine, 48 hours in Georgia. Now, she goes on to detail the human experiments, which include testing for antibodies against some 14 pathogens, including what's called Crimean Congo, which is a hemorrhagic fever, including Borrelia species, which is Lyme disease, and others. And according to the documents, the labs in Ukraine and Georgia are part of a Pentagon $2.5 billion defense threat reduction agency, which is called DTRA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, biological engagement program, which includes research on bioagents, deadly viruses, and antibiotic resistant bacteria. So I'm surprised that they're not just doing DNA smart bombs, which would kill, say, take apart the DNA of only people with blue eyes, or only people with blonde hair, or only people who are ethnically Russian. So on March 6th, in a statement to the official RAI Novosti in Moscow, Major General Igor Konashenkov, who was the spokesman for the Russian Ministry of Defense, stated that they had received documents, quote, from employees of Ukrainian biological laboratories confirming that components of biological weapons were being developed in Ukraine in close proximity to Russian territory. He noted, in the course of a special military operation, the facts of an emergency cleansing by the Kiev regime of traces of a military biological program being implemented in Ukraine, funded by the United States Department of Defense, were uncovered, unquote. Now, added to this evidence of nuclear and biological weapons, or WMD placements inside Ukraine in recent years, the West NATO member countries have been pouring billions of dollars of military equipment, including anti-tank weapons and explosives, into Ukraine, while Zelensky, rumored by opposition to be in hiding in the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, Poland, brave man that he is, calls repeatedly for a NATO no-fly zone over the Ukraine, an act that would be a direct casus belli, is what it's called, of war between Russia and NATO, a war that rapidly could go nuclear or beyond. We have crazed American congressmen and scumbag homosexual senators like Lindsey Graham, as an example, Obama's boyfriend, by the way, who were talking about this no-fly zone, and people have to point out to them, a no-fly zone means we would be shooting at Russian planes and possibly shooting down Russian planes, which the Russians, who have 6,000 nuclear weapons, might just see as an act of war. So this act would be a direct casus belli of war between Russia and NATO, a war that rapidly could go nuclear or beyond. Now, in 2014, you don't know this or not, but there was video floating around out there that somebody used 2 limited tactical nuclear weapons in the Ukrainian Revolution. Now, this video footage surfaced again, and I was one of the people that debunked this because it surfaced again on Jim Stone's website saying that this is the Russians using nukes against Ukraine, and I was the one that had to then pull up the old footage from 2014 to then say, nope, this is old footage. This happened way back in the day, and they're trying to use it again. So the question is whether this years-long provocation by Washington, continuing to poke the bear, Washington and NATO, of Russian national security via the Ukraine, is aimed at destroying the viability of Russia as a sovereign nation and military power, primarily because Vladimir Putin has sworn to strangle the New World Order with his bare hands if necessary, which is why you're seeing such vitriol against him in all these various nations, because this is all a direct response to the New World Order neo-Nazi gang, if you will, against what might be not a madman, not somebody crazy, but against what might be somebody who's cutting off the head of the hydra or the serpent or the snake, so to speak. So it's a calculated move to use sanctions against Russia to cause global collapse and energy crisis, food shortages, and worse, all to advance the Davos 2030 Great Restart agenda. By the way, the Davos agenda was basically to restart all the economies over, very much like they did with Bretton Woods back in 1944-45, but by murdering about 6 billion people on the planet, reducing the population of the planet to a unique 500 million. Now, it's weird because there were some interesting monuments that went up called the Georgia Guidestones. And on the Georgia Guidestones, one of the tenets of the Guidestones, if you will, which seem to be the 10 commandments of the New World Order, is the reduction of the global population to 500 million. Now, the New Age community is not innocent in this, because if you look at the Billy Meyer UFO case, way back when, and I wrote a movie about Billy Meyer, I had to read something like 5,000 pages of his notes, Contact with the Pleiades, volumes 1 through 4. Now Billy Meyer thinks that he's the prophet Enoch, and he's got what's called the Henoch prophecies, because Semyaze, his original Pleiadian cosmonaut, banged her head and is now in another universe healing, and so her father took over, whose name is Ptah, sorry, excuse me. And now he's giving him prophecies as well. They're very interesting stuff. Some, some a lot of way out stuff, but some stuff that's dead on. So this provocation by the United States and NATO, destroying Russia, is it calculated to move or use sanctions against Russia to cause global collapse and an energy crisis, food shortages, and worse, all of which Russia is being blamed for, which is complete nonsense because they were happening before this conflict happened. Gas had already gone from $1.49 to almost $4.05 way before this conflict happened. Now it's at $7 a gallon, and they're trying to say, oh no, it's good for climate change, and oh, it's great that we're crushing the middle class, and buy a $150,000 electric car. And ladies and gentlemen, electric cars are the stupidest invention ever conceived by man. They keep talking about how Elon Musk is some kind of genius. No, he's not. Electric cars were around with Edison. Edison had his own electric car. He used to be able to steer it with a rudder like a boat. Tesla had an electric car way back when. All kinds of electric cars. There were Stanley steamers. There were electric cars. There were steel cars. There were cars that were hybrid. The original Model A's and Model T's had a switch where you could then fill up with grain alcohol on your farm, and then you go into town and you drive back home on Mr. Rockefeller's gasoline. And that's also what, believe it or not, that's also what Prohibition was all about. It had nothing to do with keeping alcohol away from drunken men who would go home and beat their wives. No, what it had to do with is the fact that these backwoods stills, which were using grain alcohol, were being used as fuel by farmers. And this was a way, the entire Prohibition thing, which made people like Joseph Kennedy fabulously wealthy, and people like all the gangsters, the Chicago gangsters, back in the day. The whole point was to allow the Rockefellers to corner the market on gasoline. So, which was funny because then when we went to war against the Japanese, we kept trying to destroy all the Japanese fuel dumps, and we couldn't use any of their fuel because they were literally using rice wine or kerosene as fuel, not oil. So the Davos reset agenda is to reduce the population to 500 million. The reason I mentioned Billy Meyer is because in the original Billy Meyer notes with Semyaze talked about the perfect population for a planet, that the planet itself is an evolving entity, and that human beings were nothing more than brain cells within that planet, and that we were carrying thoughts and information across the brain. And once again, I mentioned this in our panel, is that when you're looking at the division of the East and the West, you're looking at two halves of a human brain. You're looking at the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain. The left-hand side of the brain here, which controls the right-hand side of the body, thinks in terms of 2 + 2 = 4, mathematics, geometry, rational linear time. So 2 + 4, 2 = 4 to this side of the brain. This side, which is the feminine side of the brain, which controls this side of the body, thinks in terms of symbols, archetypes, pictures, color, sight, sound, and looks at time in quantum realities. And these quantum realities of time travel, if you will, 2 + 2 = purple to this side of the brain, equals fish to this side of the brain, because it's the crazy lady in the purple moo that is dancing all around through the field of poppies, if you will. But because this side of the brain works in quantum time, all of time and space, the beginning and the middle and the end of all time and space, exists in this part of the brain. That's why we can use things like remote viewers as an example to access any target anywhere in time and space. The majority of remote viewers completely suck at predicting the future. They're terrible. David Morehouse, Ed Dames. I haven't seen a remote viewer, with the exception of me, that's been able to successfully view specific future events. They can hit targets. They can tell you where somebody's going to be at a certain time. Or I train people. And matter of fact, I go to the casino and I use remote viewing techniques at the casino. I win anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000, and then just get tired of playing and just use that to live on. And but I can teach other people how to do it, and have taught other people how to do it when I get well enough. And you can already see this, just talking this long is already starting to affect my throat. But when I get well enough, I'll start teaching those classes again. So the New World Order types, whereas the Pleiadians wanted 500 million people on the planet. And whereas now the right and the left-hand sides of the brain are starting to integrate, isn't it interesting that the East, which is Vladimir Putin and Russia, is now going up against the West with using Ukraine, which is kind of the medulla oblongata, or maybe, I don't know, even the pineal or the pituitary gland, kind of right in the center of those. And once again, remember, Ukraine was ancient Khazaria, and the Khazarian mafia in the 8th century, the Khazarians in that area, who were Rus traditionally, all converted to Judaism in the 8th century because they sat between Christian Russia, Christian Europe, and Islam. And so they picked Judaism as being neutral to both of those religions. But it also became a place where the Cossacks were. And that's where the Cossacks, Kazakhstan, and they were the ones that were brutal. They were slavers. They sacrificed children. They did all kinds of terrible things. It wasn't until the actual Russians surrounded Ukraine, or Khazaria, and took it over and killed all the criminals that things started to get better. It's kind of what they're doing now. So if they can take the reset agenda, if they can start this war, this conflict, if they can do what they say they can do, they can blame it all on evil Putin. He's a madman. He's like Hitler. And Russia, well, BlackRock and the financial powers reorganize the world, they can blame it all on the Russians and use that as the cover to reorganize the finance, another Bretton Woods agreement, if you will. And it's too early to tell, but it's certain that it's whatever prompted the action by Russia on February 24th, 2022, which I think, again, had a lot to do with Pluto going to 27 degrees Capricorn, had to have been far more serious than CNN or other controlled Western media are telling us. So there's that. Now, let's talk about time space. Let's talk about all the other stuff that I promised you I was going to talk about, why prophecy no more and what is to come. And I've just given you an aspect of that. Now, let me also, one other thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to see if I can share the screen, because I want to show you something that's about ready to happen here pretty quick. Okay. All right, I think this will actually pop up on the screen, but let me talk about this here. All right, there we go. You should be seeing that at the moment. Now, that's Madame Blavatsky. Madame Blavatsky, so far as I know, was one of the great. She was Russian, of course. She was one of the great metaphysical influences of the 20th century. She was a contemporary of Einstein, of Aleister Crowley, of Rajneesh Gurdjieff, of some of the great metaphysical influences. Most people don't realize that around the turn of the century, spiritualism was as popular as Christianity in the United States. It had some devotees like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was, of course, the author of the Sherlock Holmes adventures. Doyle's best friend was Harry Houdini, and Harry Houdini spent a lot of his time running around trying to debunk spiritualists. And by the way, if you've ever been to an actual spiritualist church, there's one in Florida, actually in where is it, Sarasota, I think it was, that I went to, where they take a medium, they put him in a black box, they chain him up or handcuff him or what have you. They turn all the lights out so everything is pitch black, and then there's literally like a runway where the spirit of whoever they're talking to comes out on the runway. They shake a tambourine, they ring a bell, they do all kinds of crazy things. Matter of fact, a tape I heard had to do with them actually channeling the spirit or ghost of Walt Disney, which I think is interesting. But Blavatsky, I should get some other pictures of Blavatsky here, because Blavatsky was able to not only channel spiritual entities, but there was ectoplasmic astral goo that would come out of her body, and it would manifest in forms that they would photograph that looked like Lord Katumi, the Archangel Gabriel, amazing things. And again, this tube of white plasmic ghost goo would come out of her mouth and then manifest as these various creations. Blavatsky was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society. So it was actually her and another man named Manly P. Hall that actually put this together, the Theosophical Society. This is one of the posters for the Theosophical Society at the time. You can actually see the on the left-hand side of the poster, you see the Ankh. On the right-hand side of the poster, you can actually see the symbol of the Tetragrammaton, which is the 4 square, along with the triangle, which of course adds up to 7. Within the crown that she's wearing, you see the swastika that was used on the chest of Buddha. You see the Star of Solomon, also known as the Seal of David. I believe the signs on either side of the zodiac there have to do with the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac that are predicted. Now, one of Blavatsky's major predictions, and she made many predictions that came true, was about a Death Star that was going to come in the first quarter of the 21st century. Now, Dr. Daniel Brown of Nottingham Trent University explains the curious case of what he called the boom star. And the boom star was a pair of supernovas that collided back in 1638. Now, 1638 was an interesting year as far as the evolution of mankind, but the prediction by Daniel Brown and by NASA is that the light, not the sound, but the light of these boom stars colliding, these 2 supernovas colliding, was not going to reach Earth until June 1st of 2022. Well, guess what? That's pretty darn close. And if you look at Blavatsky talked about this Death Star appearing in the sky, and she specifically talked about it having to do with the sign of the swan. And okay, what about the swan? The swan relates to a constellation called Cygnus, the swan. It's identified by numerous royal houses and royal bloodlines as being the symbol of the Merovingians. It's also a symbol of the Queen of England, who Elizabeth actually traces her bloodline directly back to Odin. Believe it or not, that Odin was a real guy. It wasn't just a god. But Odin and his wife Freya and his sons Thor and Loki and Balder and whatever else were actually real people, and that the Queen of England is actually descended from this person. So she talked about this star appearing, and the star would have something to do with Cygnus. Well, here's Cygnus. Actually, here's the Corona Borealis. Here's Canis Major. Here's Hercules. You can actually see the constellation of Pisces, which are the 2 fish.
You're not sharing nothing, John.
I'm sorry?
You're not sharing nothing.
I'm
Nothing
not
on the
sure.
screen.
There's nothing on the screen. Okay. How am I doing this then? Okay. Any suggestions? I don't know. It worked yesterday when I was, wait, hold on. Oh, share screen. Okay. If I share the screen there. All right, here we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, share.
It's working now.
It is. Okay, there we go. Can you see that? Should be a start field?
Yes.
All right. Okay, sorry. All right, so here we go. Thank you for telling me. Otherwise, I would not have been aware. So this is Madame Blavatsky, as I explained, one of the great metaphysical influences of the 20th century. Just went through that whole thing. She was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society with Manly P. Hall. That's kind of a poster for the Theosophical Society, and she was the progenitor of that. This is the Dr. Daniel Brown of Nottingham Trent University. It explains the curious case of the boom star. And again, the light from this exploding pair of supernovas is supposed to, according to NASA, and we'll see if NASA's right, and they're not right often, but NASA stands for never straight answer. It's supposed to hit us on June 1st of 2022, which I think directly relates in with Blavatsky's prophecy of this Death Star, as she called it. And here is Cygnus. You can see in the upper left-hand corner. Here is Pisces, Corona Borealis, Virgo, Hercules, Canis Major, down here at the bottom. Now, this star, as you can see on the screen, appears on the right wing of the constellation of Cygnus. And again, Cygnus the swan is also, interesting enough, a symbol for Lucifer, because the swan is amazingly beautiful and graceful. But if anybody's ever played golf and tried to get a ball out of the pond, which I have, and been attacked by a swan, that they're incredibly vicious. People used to use geese instead of dogs as guard dogs, if you will, on farms. And you use swans the same way. So here we go. So here is Cygnus. Here is Lyra. Here's Vulpecula. Here's Lacentia. Here's, well, I think that's Sagittarius over there. But here's Cygnus, and you see the red dot here, that this is coming summer of 2022. And I've actually been giving this lecture for a couple of years where I've been warning people about this, that right near Lyra, which, by the way, the Lyran and Pleiadian Empire are the two empires that many claim are responsible for the evolution of humanoid life on the surface of this planet, whereas underground you have the evolution of reptilian or saurian life, literally reptile men, if you will, that have evolved over 65 million years, that are being assisted by the Alpha Draconian Empire. The Lyrans and the Pleiadians call theirs the New Republic, and the Alpha Draconian Empire is the as the Dominion, or the Old Dominion. So this Death Star is going to appear at that particular time, and Madame Blavatsky's prophecy was that in this period there would be a great culling of men and animals. This great culling of men and animals. Now, they might be able to blame this whole thing on Russia, whereas on the one hand, Russia could be the most evil place on earth, and Vladimir Putin is just a madman, and he's just doing things for no particular reason at all, even though in his entire career, all he has done is protect and defend people. In his entire career, he went into Syria to keep 100,000 Christians from being slaughtered. He annexed Crimea, didn't annex it, but had the people vote in Crimea, has never forced anybody to do anything against their will, but he annexed Crimea by having them vote, as I said, 96% or so for them to vote to become part of the Russian bloc. So Vladimir Putin has stopped at least two major conflicts that we know of. So he's not a person that seems to act. And again, it seems like Joe Biden is playing checkers with blocks of cheese, and Vladimir Putin is playing chess, unfortunately. But once again, is this true? Is Madame Blavatsky's prediction of this? Because if this heats up, if we put in a no-fly zone, if we go shoot down Russian aircraft, if this war turns nuclear with NATO, first off, Russia would win the war hands down. Second off, we're talking about the deaths of 1 billion people. Third off, if Chernobyl goes into meltdown and actually hits the aquifer, you would have an explosion that would take out a huge chunk of Eastern Europe, and at the same time poison possibly a third of the waters on the planet. I'm just saying. Now, the last time Saturn was in Aquarius was during the Rodney King riots. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn, it was during the American Revolution. Neptune was in Pisces when Rome fell, and we have all three right now. Now, this is I am not so sure about Saturn and Aquarius. Saturn's in Capricorn right now, 28 years. 28, it goes back to, okay, Saturn's actually in, what is it? No, okay, all right. The Saturn and Aquarius part might not even be correct, but this is interesting enough. Now, this is a man named John Deagle, and his organization predicts massive global depopulation of 50% to 80% by 2025. Now, historically, a change in the economic paradigm, Deagle's organization predicts massive global depop of 50 to 80% by 2025. Now, this is the goal of these New World Order maggot sons of bitches. These are the people that want an 80% reduction of the population. These are the people that feel that 500 million would be the perfect population for the Earth. Would there be any precedent for this? Now, here's another one of our gigantic problems. Elon Musk and Bill Gates are two of the people that actually, oddly enough, are warning you about artificial intelligence. Now, maybe James Cameron was the first one to warn you because he talked about Skynet, and that once Skynet became conscious, that Skynet just decides that human beings are a virus on the earth and need to be wiped out. But here's what I think the global elite are waiting on. The problem is that you need people to make stuff. You need people to rule over. You might be able to go into your deep underground military base, your dumb hole, if you will. Excuse me. And hide out for these things and maybe ride out, oh, I don't know, an extraterrestrial invasion or a massive depopulation of the earth. Now, where would most of these people go? Some people claim that they're going to go out into space. Maybe so. Other people are talking about Australia. Australia, for almost 30 years, has been building massive, deep underground bases, actually mostly around the area of Pine Gap, which is the Australian version of Area 51. It's actually up near a place called Alice Springs. And matter of fact, I knew a fellow that owned the Bunker Hill mine up near Kellogg, Idaho. And they were the largest producers of nickel, zinc, and silver. And I talked to a guy there that was that made these gigantic wheels for drilling, and he says they're shipping them all to Australia. He says the company works 7 days a week, and they can't keep up with the demand. And he said everything at that time was being shipped to Australia to build these gigantic underground bases. Now already the Russians and Vladimir Putin are ready because they've got something called the Yamanatu complex, which sounds like an Indian casino in Southern California. But the Yamanatu complex can actually comfortably fit 10 million people underground, and these 10 million people underground would be safe from any kind of nuclear war. Now, Deagle, I'll just read some of this here, a true intelligence organization for the U.S. government, predicts a massive 50 to 80% global depopulation by 2025. Few people are familiar with this website, and even more say the organization does not legitimately exist, despite the overwhelming removal of its significance. WikiLeaks, which can't ever be trusted for anything, documents revealed that it was legitimately used as a reference material point in a Stratfor report, which once again, Stratfor is kind of an Israeli Mossad setup, technological capabilities of the North People's Republic of Korea. Now, according to its own website, Deagle provides news and information on international military aviation and advanced tech. The website contains articles from 2003, but little is known about the real owners. Many online researchers have mistakenly confused this site with Deagle, which is owned by Edwin Deagle Jr., Assistant to the Secretary of Defense and Assistant Secretary of Defense. Deagle's reports, particularly the aforementioned research on North Korea, were also providing the president during presidential briefings. Deagle thus provides information which is then used global intelligence communities and government. And here's a partial list of known Deagle partners and customers. According to their own websites, the National Security Agency, NSA, NATO, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the Russian Defense Procurement Agency, Stratfor, the World Bank, and the United Nations. The key to understanding the process America will enter in the next decade is migration. And in the, I have this here, and in the key factor that enabled the United States to achieve its status as a colossus was immigration, with the benefits of population expansion favoring credit expansion and brain drain from other countries and the rest of the world for the benefit of the states. Now, the collapse of the Western financial system will wipe out the standard of living of its people while putting an end to Ponzi schemes such as the stock market and pension funds. That's Social Security, that's Medicare, that's Medicaid. The population will be hit so hard by a full array of bubbles and Ponzi schemes that the migration engine will start to work in reverse acceleration due to ripple effects leading to the demise of states. You're already seeing that happen in New York. You're already seeing it happen in California. You're already seeing people flee those states or places for free states like Texas and Florida. And this situation, invisible to states, will cascade with unprecedented and devastating effects on the economy. The offshoring of jobs will surely end for many American companies relocating abroad, thus becoming foreign companies. Now, is this why they're opening up the floodgates to immigration into the United States? We're actually changing populations, whereas you have older people who are retiring. And remember, the baby boom generation from 1945 ending about 1966, with the peak of that immigration or that massive birth boom happening between 1958 and 1959. And you're talking about 88 million people. That means that you have tens of thousands of people every day now retiring or hitting the ages between 55 and 65. Now, it's interesting that you had a massive wave of abortion happen from 1972 up until about 1986. Now, is still the real tragedy of abortion is that I don't know why people don't realize this, because if you think about it, you've got the Soviet Union, who in about the 79 years of the Soviet Union lasting killed or murdered a little over 125 million people. Then you have the Chinese communists, who under Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution, they murdered about between 60 and about 65 million of their own people. Because I guess if you're killing your own people, it's okay. But which once again shows that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century has been the expansion of government, of totalitarian systems. And yet you still have idiots out there who still think socialism is a good idea, whereas socialism is just communism in smaller doses, or who see themselves as democratic socialists, which means 51% of the people get to vote to take away stuff from 49% of the people, which is still wrong. Then you have Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler, let's say he killed maybe 15 million people. Let's throw 6 million Jews in there. Sure, why not? And in World War II, which kills however many. Well, then you have abortion, which means that feminism and the supposed empowerment of women to kill babies, which is just a way for men to not take responsibility. But you have 75 million abortions, which puts feminism up there with communism and Soviet communism, Chinese communism, and Hitler as one of the big things. Oh, and let's not forget Bush and Obama. The Bush and Obama administrations were responsible for killing 27 million people all across the Middle East. Kind of adds up if you think about it. And since 1900, you can actually literally say that the four horsemen of the apocalypse rode pretty much roughshod all through the 20th century. So is that because when you consider that the first horseman of the apocalypse is a black horse that's actually, the first horse in the apocalypse is a white horse who's carrying a bow and arrow. And it's interesting that that relates to the sign of Sagittarius. Now, that means that from 1900, now remember, from 1855 until the First World War, and literally from 1844, in the 60-year period between 1844, 66 years, and 1900 or so, everything that we use today was invented. We're talking about steam engines, internal combustion engines, the movie camera, movie film, electric cars, Nikolai Tesla's alternating current, Edison's direct current. All these amazing inventions and things happen, which then lead us to what appears to be a true age of enlightenment and peace right around 1900 or so. So what you have happening is you have the white horse represented by, I guess you could say, Krishna or Christ, carrying a bow and arrow, which also represents Sagittarius. And of course, galactic center is at about 27 degrees Sagittarius now, mind you. And yes, 27, 28 degrees Sagittarius, which is the center of the galaxy, which is looks like a big pyramid, by the way, or a teacup. But that's, and the arrow that Sagittarius is about ready to shoot, which represents humanity, because humanity is then pulled backwards. And so that arrow is then shot or loosed from the bow, which quantum leaps humanity up and over a lot of evolution to the next step. So the first wave is a massive inflection of Christ consciousness, and that Christos, that Christ consciousness, manifests itself as millions of people being born around the turn of the century, 1900 or so. So that's the first wave of population increase. You had an increase in medical supplies, invention of penicillin, medical techniques that had to do with saving more babies, saving women in childbirth, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is then kind of brought to a halt by the First World War, where of course millions are killed, and by Spanish influenza. And I can never get the proper numbers on this, but most people say the Spanish flu killed about 100 million people worldwide, and some say between 10 and 50 million in the United States alone. The next horse, interesting enough, is the black horse. And the black horse is a rider who's carrying a set of scales, which represents the introduction of a financial system. Now, it's interesting that the financial system happens. So we have the white horse, and which is a huge influx of population, of the Christos, of souls returning. It represents the resurrection of the quick and the dead, but from a reincarnation standpoint, that it's not people rising like zombies from their grave. It's universal reincarnation, that everybody who has gone for the last 2,000 years from the death of Christ, who then pays the karmic debt for all of mankind, that allows us to then move through the 7 levels of consciousness, train with ascended masters, train with angels, train with, you know, with whomever, and then rises up to that. Now, beginning with 1900, now it's time for the final exam. Now it's time for everybody to come back to school and take your SATs, so to speak. And so everybody now returns, takes a physical body, increases the population. The next thing is the rider of the black horse, and the black horse carries a set of scales. That's the banking system. That's the Babylonian banking system. That is the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve and the European banks come over and they split America up into 12 sections or 12 neighborhoods for these crime families, you know, the Gottis and the Corleones and the Sopranos and whatever, split the United States up into 12 lands or gangs or neighborhoods. Through their banking systems. And here we have, these are some of Deagle's reports. The next step, by the way, is the Red Horse of War. And you can actually look at that Red Horse of War as being the First World War, the Great World War. The Second World War was nothing but a continuation of the First World War. The Cold War was a continuation of the Second World War. So basically the entire 20th century is one long giant war that only stops long enough to repopulate and rearm. And then of course the final horse, the livid horse, the pale horse, the green horse as it's called, is disease. And you could basically say that Spanish influenza is what stopped the First World War. Nobody really won. Everybody walked away because everybody was too sick to fight. So is that the first phase of the apocalypse? Is that your biblical Armageddon there? Now here's Germany. Look at the gross domestic product of Germany as being 3.7 trillion, and the population being 81 million. By 2025, they project their population as being less than 28 million, with a GDP of 621 billion. Here's France, same thing. GDP 2.6 trillion, population 67 million. By 2025, France will have a domestic product of 1.1 trillion, with a population of less than 35 million. That's a slice of more than half the population of France. So it's not just us. Australia is the same way. Population of 23 million now goes down to less than 15 million. And I would think the reason Australia has been chosen by the New World Order as an example is because Australia has been the most geologically sound place on the earth. That's why you have things like platypuses as an example, or various egg-laying marsupials, wallabies and wombats. It's why you have kangaroos, which oddly enough, kangaroo, I think this is funny, when the settlers came to the Botany Bay colony in Australia, they asked the Aborigines, they said, what are those? And they said, kangaroo, which means I don't know in Aborigine. So they became known as kangaroo. So kangaroo and abo means I don't know. So that's Australia. So once again, here's Canada. In the year 2017, Canadian population is about 36 million, as again, about 13 million more than Australia. Gross domestic product, 1.6 trillion. Military budget, 16 billion by 2025. Their forecast is less than 26 million, which means they lose 10 million of their population, considering it's the least populated country and is one of the largest countries on earth next to Russia. But the GDP of 1.1 trillion with a population of 26 million or so, that's not so good. Here's the UK. British pound, 2017. These are all projections made in 2017 for 2025. 2.6 trillion GDP, military budget 56 billion. By 2025, their population is down again from 66 million to 15 million. That's a lot. GDP of 197 billion. Not so good. And last but not least, here's the United States. Currency, US dollar, 2017, population 327. I think it's up to 330 now. If you count illegal aliens, it's about 1.6 billion. Gross domestic product is $19 trillion. I'm surprised the economy is that large. Military budget 637. That's larger than every NATO country combined. Matter of fact, I think when Obama was in, he increased the budget of the military to about 750 billion. To give you an idea, by the way, of how big that budget is, the federal military budget for a military that constitutionally is not even supposed to exist. The federal government was never supposed to have its own army. It was supposed to actually be the National Guards of the various states, which is why you needed permission of the states in order to raise an army in the first place. But the budget of the Pentagon for 1 year is more than the budgets of all 50 state governments combined. And by 2025, Deagle is predicting that the population will be 100 million. The GDP is 2.4 trillion, and the military budget being 32 trillion. I suppose that's a good thing. But these are the world figures for what Deagle has projected. 327 million down to 100 million. And they've been right in the past. So let's see how that specifically changes. This is a US Navy map of the United States. And the blue section being the submerged section of the US, the left-hand part would actually be a rupturing of the San Andreas fault and a breaking apart of the Juan de Fuca plate, which would then mean that the platelet of because California sits on a continental shelf would break off into the ocean. It would actually then make Colorado and apparently Phoenix seaports. You would then have the rupturing of the New Madrid fault in the center, which then means that the Great Lakes would become a large inland sea, that everything would then flow along the New Madrid line along the Mississippi. Florida is already 3 feet below sea level, but it would wipe out the East Coast to about 50 miles in from there. Now, this US Navy map is projected for the year 2025. It is the same map that was given to me by Alfred Bielik, who claims that he went to the year 2139 and that he was part of the Philadelphia experiment, and the USS Eldridge went screaming through time. I don't know how much time I have left here. Is time I'm supposed to go to? 1:15. Okay. All right. Well, we started a little late, so am I going to 1:30 or 1:15? I don't know if anybody's listening or paying attention, but I'm just doing what I do. So
John, you're until 4:15.
and so when?
4:15.
Okay, because we started 15 minutes late, but okay,
Okay,
I'll just wrap this up then.
You could go over if you want. It's fine if
Okay,
you want to
all
go
right.
over.
You guys might want to take a look at this or do a screen grab of this, because the only thing that's wrong here, I'm sorry, is that Pluto went to 27 degrees Capricorn. It was February 22nd, not June 22nd. I don't know why I've got this wrong on this chart. So, but this is this crisis point now for the United States to August 4th of 2022. It retros and crosses again every single one of these points, December 10, 2022 to January 2nd of 2023. Then again, September 20th of 2023 to November 1st of 2023, moves into glorious Aquarius on January 2024. And then for 9 months, the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, and peace will fill the planets. All sung by the 5th dimension. We move into 5th dimensional time space, where that which we think becomes physical reality, which is what magic is. And then the new age finally begins when he moves into Aquarius for good on the solstice for Christmas, December 21st of 2024. Pluto in Aquarius lasts 18.5 years. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, is that, again, Pluto moving into Aquarius, what does Aquarius rule? The symbol of Aquarius is a couple of squiggly lines that you would think is water. It is not water. It is the transmission of electromagnetic energy and information through the air. That is why Aquarius is an air sign, not a water sign. It's one of the reasons why Jesus, when he said, go into the town and find me a place to eat dinner with my 12 friends. And we also know that Jesus drove a Honda because he gathered all the apostles in one accord. So just saying, he said, you're going to find a man with a cistern on his shoulder, and ask that man, and that man will be able to find us a place. That's man carrying the cistern represented Aquarius. Now, Aquarius rules computers. It rules artificial intelligence. It rules all kinds of crazy things that have to do with the personal computer and whatever else. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge is that the global elites and the New World Order scumbags that want to kill oh, I don't know, 7.5 billion people and reduce the population about 500 million or so. They can't do that until they have artificial intelligence. When you have AI and you have machines that can build the machines that can build the other machines that can then build more machines, now you don't need people. Now, in fact, you need a culling of men and animals, so to speak, to reduce the global population to a manageable 500 million so that you can then have the entire earth to yourself as some kind of, I don't know, some kind of park, if you will. And again, if you're these global elites, and let's say there is an alien invasion, which there may certainly be, the Alpha Draconians are on their way, and all kinds of bad things might happen in this particular decade. And let's not forget the Chinese. I made predictions back in '94 that in this decade that we would see a military invasion of the United States through Canada, through Australia, down into the central United States, where the final war, which you know of as Armageddon, the final battle of the apocalypse actually happens in Denver. Now it's interesting again, because that would mean that the United States is the promised land. Let's get into the biblical prophecy again. So let's say, once again, you've got the Billy Meyer people, you've got the New World people that want a population of 500 million. You've got coming artificial intelligence where Elon Musk and Bill Gates are telling you that only 5% of the population will survive AI. What do they know that we don't? We're moving into Aquarius, which means there are going to be massive advances in transhumanism, in computers, in AI. You're seeing it happen now. You can't go into, you don't go into McDonald's with seeing a person. You make all your, they've used COVID to completely AI everything. You can't use cash money anymore because, oh, there's germs on money. So now they've managed to take it to a cashless society using a disease. And I've been telling you from Jump Street, back when they started the CHEM trails back in the day, about 1998, that chemtrails were going to be phase one, that they were going to prostrate the population by pumping a barium and aluminum into the atmosphere, along with a polymer and a glue mixed with syphilis spirochetes, by the way. And by the way, what's the chemical number for the chemical symbol for barium? It's Ba. What's the chemical symbol for aluminum? It's Al. Put those together, what does it spell? Bal. It spells ball. And if you people think that the occult black magic significance of all this is lost on these scumbags, you got another thing coming. So they're pumping literally ball into the atmosphere. They're flattening the cilia in the upper part of the lungs. They're destroying your immune system. Then they introduce a virus. Now, once again, I've been saying that the vaccinations that people were taking was going to take 9 months for this to start happening. And that 9 months is right about now. So within the next 30 days or so, you're going to see people freaking out. You're going to see what looks like demonic possession. You're going to see reports of black-eyed children. You're going to see babies of mothers who got this vaccine when they went to the hospital, and the babies are completely torqued. They're a whole new species. Their genetics and their DNA have been completely rewritten. Now, I'm not sure I even have time to tell you how a lot of this has changed, but let me tell you how the shift in the timelines is happening. All right, the map that I showed you, that's just important what you're looking at right here with this. And of course, it's depends on whether, does Jesus come back and save the world or does he crush us all? I'm not sure. So how have the timelines changed and shifted? All right. Gosh, I have so many stories to tell you on how I've been in timeline shifts and changes. Let me tell you the first story of what happened back in, I think it was 1981. I was living in Hollywood on Cahuenga Boulevard, just up from Paramount, just over the hill from Warner Brothers and Universal and all those kind of fun places. And we used to go to the house once a month. We would go to the house of a wonderful man named Hal Wilcox. And Hal Wilcox was one of the original UFO contactees. He appeared on the Jack Paar show. He was on the Tonight Show. He was leading big expeditions out to Giant Rock in Landers, California, which was the Area 51 really of the 50s and 60s. Thousands of people would go out there to watch the UFOs all flying around. You think UFO phenomenon is big now. In the 50s, people were even crazier for it. So every Monday, once a month, we used to go to Hal's house. And there was a group of us that were studying with Hal, that were doing meditation techniques with Hal. And we would do a meditation technique and somebody would open up and they would channel this Commander Faj was the guy's name. And Faj was from a planet called Cello, and he represented a galactic federation, and there were 48 evolving worlds, and that we were the slow kid on the block. We were like the 48th, if you will. And one day, and it was interesting because each person in the group would pop open, if you will, and begin to channel a message from Commander Faj. Now, Faj would come out and say, I'm not channeling, I'm not a spirit. I've tuned into a particular brain frequency, literally like a Bluetooth in your head, so to speak. And he would give messages to the group, and he would talk to us about, what they needed us to do that month. So one day, I think it came through a kind of a large, big, beautiful woman, a black lady named Bernadette. And Faj came through and said, we need you to find the books of a spiritual teacher named Rajneesh Gurdjieff. And we're like, okay, who's that? I have no idea. And they said, well, he's important and he's a major influence of spirituality of the 20th century. And we need your assignment for this month is to go find books by this guy. So like, okay, whatever, never heard of him. So this is back in the day before the internet, when you had to actually do work, when you had to do legwork, you had to do research, you went to school, you didn't have computers, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have any of this stuff. So I went around to Needham Bookfinders. I went around to Hollywood Books. I went to the Bodhi Tree, which was just so sad because the Bodhi Tree was a major metaphysical mecca for people. It was on Melrose. It was right next to the Earth Cafe. A bunch of celebrities used to hang out there and whatever else. So I went in there and talked to this girl named Julie, who was very, very snazzy, very snappy, very hoochie mama. And, kind of put the schmooze on her and started talking to her. And so I put in a card of any books by this Rajneesh Gurdjieff guy. So went to all the different places, put in cards, put in orders. Nobody had them. Needham Bookfinders was one. Hollywood Books was the other. Nothing, no one, nobody had ever heard of them. I thought, well, this is another wild goose chase. So we were on our way to Hal's house. Oddly enough, he lived on his name was Hal Wilcox. He lived on Wilcox Avenue. And I think he was the grandson of the Wilcox that actually founded the real estate development called Hollywood Land at that time. And so on my way to his house, I figured, I'll stop by the Bodhi Tree. I'll see Julie. I'll talk with her. I'll see what's going on. And I walk in and I say, hey, Julie, how you doing? She's like, hello, what can I help you with? And I said, oh, did you ever get any books in by that Gurdjieff guy? And she points at a case on the far wall that's from ceiling to floor, that's under glass, that has a lock on it, and it's all books by Gurdjieff, Rajneesh Gurdjieff. And I said, oh, you got them in? And she goes, those books have been here since the bookstore opened 15 years ago. I went, oh, okay. Well, weren't you supposed to call me? I don't understand what you're talking about. Well, I put in a card. Let me go check. No card. I said, do you remember me? And she's like, I've never seen you before a day in my life. And I thought, well, I'm not that forgettable. And again, I went to Needham Bookfinders, same story. We've had books here by Gurdjieff. Of course, he's a popular author. Here's a stack of books by him. Went to Hollywood Books, same thing. Gurdjieff books all over the place. I'd never heard of this guy. And so we go to Hal's place, and I'm running into about 12 other people who are completely flipped out by this, all of whom have Gurdjieff books under their arms, all of whom have the same story, that suddenly these books from out of nowhere just appeared. So we do a meditation. Somebody pops, I forget who it is. Commander Faj comes through and says, because you were dedicated, because you did what we asked, because you were true to your task and your purpose, and you focused, we were allowed to change time. And I think I said, well, how? And they said there was an American journalist, and we made sure that he caught a train that in the other timeline he previously missed. And so just by putting a puff of air behind him, he took one more step and caught this train, which allowed him to then catch a lecture by Gurdjieff, which then allowed him to take Gurdjieff to the United States, which then allowed him to publish Gurdjieff's books. And he became a major metaphysical influence of the 20th century. And we asked, well, how did this change things? He said, well, it changed things subtly because it changed people's consciousness. It changed the wavelength of their consciousness. And as it changed the wavelength of the consciousness, it was something that allowed us to do very specific things to change the mindset of Earth. and bring you closer to joining the Galactic Federation, as they called it. And they said, you're the slow kids on the planet, and everybody has to evolve pretty much at the same time. And so we've been allowed to help you. And we have a very specific series of tasks, if you will. And the United States has been set up in such a way to allow you the freedom of speech and the freedom of thought and the freedom of spirituality to be able to break through to ascend mankind. However, if you fail in this task, we will then have to start over, and we will start over in Brazil. And it would be the Brazilians who would be the forefront of healing and spirituality. As a matter of fact, Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil, because they believe in the end time prophecies, they built the capital way out in the jungle. It's 1,500 miles from the coast, because they built the city specifically to survive various earth changes which they saw coming. Now, I think I popped up and said, well, have you ever changed any other aspects of the timeline? And they said, yes. And I said, could you please explain? And they said the specific timeline that they changed, that Earth had gone through a phase where wall to wall, it was totalitarian governments. It was the Germans, it was the Russians, it was the Spanish, it was the Chinese, and Earth had gotten to an Orwellian place where it was a jackboot stepping on a human face for 1,000 years. And there was no room for anyone to evolve, because totalitarian governments, literally from east to west, controlled every inch of Earth, and there was no place for freedom. So they were allowed, they were given permission by whatever galactic council to go back and change an event in time. And that event was the Battle of the English versus the Spanish Armada in 1588. And we asked, I think I asked again, how did it change? And they said, we put a ship behind a very fast English ship, which allowed the English ship to T-bar on a Spanish man of war. Now, man of wars were 3 stories of guns on either side. I mean, you have to imagine an armed apartment building with nothing but guns in every room. And they T-barred on this, and they managed to sink this man of war. And they apparently set fog and bad weather and whatever. And the large majority of the Spanish Armada actually washed up on the shores of Ireland. And but the amazing part about this is that this would be like the Mexicans beating the United States Navy in a battle in the Gulf of Mexico. And so what happened was that the English, by beating the Spanish Armada, now you have to remember, the Spanish Armada were all Catholics who were about ready to punish free and Protestant England. They were moving across with the Inquisition. They had entire ships with torture devices that were all ready to invade England and begin to torture and murder and slaughter and kill Protestants. They were not kidding around. The Spanish Inquisition was about ready to come to England and, of course, crucify Queen Elizabeth and crush freedom for 1,000 years. And because the English won that one battle, apparently with the help of these time travelers who made sure that they did, they allowed them to colonize Canada, to colonize the United States, to colonize Australia, to colonize the various places which they did, which has now led to obviously the American Revolution and the freedom which we currently enjoy, just because of that one moment in history. And they said, we managed to change the timeline, and you found Gurdjieff, and if you continue to do the things that we ask you to do, at some point, someday, you may walk out of this room, and the whole planet will be at peace, and there will be trade with other planets, and travel to other worlds and other galaxies, and you'll all be part of the Galactic Federation of Peace and Joy and Love, and only you would know that it would be any different. And that's almost a good place to start the story on, or to end the story on today. We've got a couple more minutes here, but let me just tell you how I've personally experienced the time change. Now, being somebody who, and I try not to say this in any egotistical way, but who attained, I guess you could say, cosmic consciousness, which is how, when you're, quote, psychic or psycho, you tune into other people, you do readings for other people. People ask me, how do I become psychic? How do I expand, my field of psychic senses or sensibilities. And I say, well, the best way to do it is you just have to increase your feelings of gratitude for the universe, for everything that the universe has given you. And of course, increase your empathy for others and increase and expand your field of love. That's why when I teach SRV, which I'm praying to get back to, when I teach spiritual remote viewing, I will put my viewers up against, Ed Dames or, David Morehouse or any of these military viewers, because you're using the most unique and powerful ability ever in the history of man to kill people. And it eventually drives you insane, which I think is what happened to Morehouse, which I think is what happened to Ed. It drives you nuts. But when you operate in a universe of complete love and compassion, that's why Alex Trebek was the ultimate Buddha and why Jeopardy is the ultimate game show, because Jeopardy gives you the answers. You're the one that has to figure out the questions. And the universe as we know it is filled with nothing but answers and information, but you have to ask the right questions. So in my path to this, when I came back from living in a monastery in Nepal and my adventures in India, when I literally was at the end of my rope, I just had a nightclub business that failed because I had partners that had ripped me off. I had a girlfriend that I deeply loved that I, just left me for somebody else, and because I was working so hard. But I went to go find God. I literally packed a bag and a stick. I had a lot of money from the stock market and went to go find God, if you will. And I wound up at the Dalai Lama's Sangha in Dharamsala. It was in the McLeod Ganj Mountains. I traveled to Tengmache, which is at the foot of Mount Everest. I lived there for about 8 months or so, learned everything I could, came across, did a meditation in the Newport in the Delhi airport in India. Went to Madras and had my Nadi leaves done. And I was 27, 28 years old, and they told me I would go to prison when I was 58 years old, and then I'd be there for 4 years. And exactly to the day I was there for 4 years, that dark forces would align against me, that they would lie about me, that they would, trash me to the world because I became too much of a light and too much of a power for them. That all happened. So, now I'm back here talking to you. So when this thing happened, I had predicted the earthquake in San Francisco, and it was October 17th of 89. And on October 1st, I took a group of people up to Mount Shasta to see if we could stop or ameliorate a lot of the effects of the quake that I predicted was going to happen between October 15th and October 30th of 89. It happened on October 17th. It was when the Giants were playing the A's. I think it was called the Fog Series. And everybody was actually inside the baseball stadium in Oakland when the quake hit. And we managed to do meditations that stopped San Francisco from being destroyed, that pushed the epicenter of the quake down to Hollister instead of San Francisco, and stopped the city from being destroyed. So we were right on the timeline at that time. The next step of this was you had people like Gordon Scallion, who was the Mac Daddy of earthquake predictors. And at that time, earthquakes were really serious threat. I mean, you had Elizabeth Clark Prophet, you had Shirley MacLaine, you had a lot of people move out of California and move to New Mexico to become new Mexicans. I'm not exactly fond of the old Mexicans, but became new Mexicans and moved out because they were terrified of these quakes happening. Now, the interesting part about this is that the big quake that I predicted at that time happened in Landers, which is right at the edge of the Juan de Fuco platelet, and it happened on June 28th of 1992. Now, this was a quake that was hit on by myself and was predicted by Gordon Scallion. But as I ran out in front of my house, and I had a group of people at that time that I had actually trained how to do map dowsing or astrocartography, you could probably call it, using pendulums, using the meditation techniques to figure out when the window of opportunity, if you will, was going to occur for these quakes. And we had all predicted the Landers quake. And during the Landers quake, and this is what was the most interesting to me, twice in my house in Hermosa Beach, I had fleets of UFOs, fleets, mind you, not just one or two, but fleets of craft actually flying over my house, over the Santa Monica Bay, which is known as the Queen's Necklace there. And this is the last story I'm going to tell, and I'll get out of here. But so the quake hits, and the Landers quake was interesting because it was the beginning of a chain of quakes that Gordon Scallion had predicted in his Matrix newsletter that would move up the Juan de Fuco platelet and eventually end with the Juan de Fuco plate cracking and California taking the big swim and sliding into the ocean. Now, where Landers is, there's a device called the Integratron. It's a huge circular wooden building, and it sits right on top of 6 electromagnetic ley lines. But it's also the crotch point of where the San Andreas Fault comes up, where it had opened up the Gulf of California along Baja, and then it comes up underneath the Salton Sea, which is the ocean literally oozing up underneath the fault line. And then right there where the Integratron was, George Van Tassel was told by an extraterrestrial, build this device right here on top of this power point. Now, had the Landers quake gone on another 60 seconds, it would have actually opened it up and moved into what's called the Barstow Gap. Underneath Barstow, California is just a bunch of nothing for 130 miles straight down into the earth. Barstow would have completely disappeared. The whole thing would have cracked open. Had that quake lasted another 60 seconds, it was a 7.6 earthquake. It was huge. It was big. Now, the quake hits me in Hermosa Beach. I run out and I'm in my shorts and everybody else, naked people and whatever, but there's 1,000 of my neighbors that are all out on the Strand because the beach is right there. You can just run across the alley. And we're sitting there, and it was a low cloud cover. And we thought at first it was maybe airplanes that were lining up to land at LAX, but we saw these, they were shaped like avocados. And there were these greenish lights underneath the cloud cover. And there was a fleet of these ships that was floating underneath the cloud cover. Now, from the clouds, these bluish white beams of light began going, began raining down from the clouds. So I'm sitting here with my neighbors watching this whole thing, just in complete shock of this. Now, it was reported on the news the next day as people who thought Paul Moyers on ABC, Channel 7, for some reason they were reporting everything, that thought that they saw beams of light and UFOs coming down from the sky, when in fact they tried to explain it away as only exploding transformers, wires were shorting out. And then they showed the exploding transformer. You just see like little sparks coming out of it, not these blue-white beams of light coming down from the sky. So in complete stunned shock of this whole thing, where we saw these beams of light, but what we were looking at was a direct either super government, super science, or a direct extraterrestrial involvement. And I remembered one of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Jonah and the adventures of Jonah, and where Jonah went to the city of Nineveh. And he hated the people of Nineveh. And he was like, you're all going to die. You're all going to die. You're all going to die. You can repent. Yeah, I don't want you to repent because I want you all to die. You're all going to get wiped out. And he goes up on a hillside and he builds himself a little special lean-to, and he sits, and he says that living gourds, again, look like avocados, with beams of light coming down from the sky, actually gathered over the city of Nineveh and apparently judged the city, and the city was spared. And they all ran up the hill and said, oh, Jonah, we want you to be the king of Nineveh. And he was like, no, I hate your guts. I don't want to be your king. I just want to get the hell out of here. I was hoping you'd all be destroyed. But right out of the passage of Jonah, I'm sitting here watching this with my own eyes. And the next fleet of UFOs came along on Halloween, October 31st of 2009, oddly enough, where we saw a fleet all over the South Bay, people filming it, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But from that day forward, the timeline completely shifted. From that day forward, Gordon Michael Scallion was wrong about everything. Dolores Cannon was wrong about everything. And my own earthquake group, and we've been on the news a bunch of times, people coming to my house because of specific quakes and dates that we've given, everybody said the map is clear. Everybody said whatever's happened, there's a whole new timeline that's been put in place. And this has happened over and over and over again. So once again, the motto of the Mayans is all is one, life has purpose, God is love. And I think that we've created a seventh chakra on the earth, being the internet, being the web, which is a kindergarten school for mass telepathic communication. And I think that this freedom of the web is what elected Donald Trump as an example. It's why these tech oligarchs are so freaked out about controlling the flow of free energy and free thought and free information and free speech, and why they must be dealt with, and why you have things like the new Trump Truth Network, why you have Telegram, why you have all these things where people are flocking. The Trump Network, as an example, has 100 million people waiting to sign on, and he's only got a bandwidth of 40 million. He's breaking the internet every day. But it is this shift and change in consciousness. It is our moving into the fifth dimension that has managed to take us from a dream state to what you think and dream can now manifest. It's all, I wear this ring, and I'll just hold it up for you so you can see. This is an exact replica of Hal Jordan's Green Lantern ring. And Green Lantern, it's green gold, and it's actually got a fire opal in the center with mother of pearl with Australian opal in the background, and the symbol of a lantern of the guardians of the universe. And the reason I wear this ring is because Hal Jordan's a regular guy, but the ring can only work through will and imagination. And with will and imagination, you can then create anything you want. You can create any thought form, any idea, any process through this. And it's all of us moving into the fifth dimension of that which you think becoming physical reality. Enough of us have gotten together, and enough of us have created a positive reality that I think that instead of 80% of the planet being destroyed and 500 million of us, that we've created a brand new and wonderful future, that we walk into that future where we shift and we change and we ascend, but all standing up without having, with accepting a coming messianic figure, in the year 2038, that allows us to, as I said, walk into that future, unbowed, chin up, shoulders back, and accepting a brand new thing and a brand new reality. So once again, life has purpose. All is one, which means we're all connected together. The entire universe is within ourselves. We're a piece of that laser hologram. That we're within the universe, but the universe is within us. Life has purpose, which means no matter how many low kicks, dirty tricks, and rotten licks you've taken, whether or not you go to prison, whether or not the federal government tries to kill you because you print books like Sands of Time, which is the ultimate disclosure document. If you want to get a hold of me, it's Sean Morton 777@gmail.com. That's Sean Morton 777@gmail. Take a look on Amazon. The books are back up. Sands of Time Volume 1, Sands of Time Volume 2, which you have to have because it's basically one book, and Book 3, which is the Isomer Protocol, and getting printed finally next week. Will be available. This month will be Book 4, Sands of Time, Time Runner, Act 1. It's Act 1 of a 3-part trilogy. They've all been optioned for major motion pictures or major television events by Arch Creek Films. So I want to say hi to David Williams and Andy Ruffle, who are the guys who run Arch Creek, and they're in the process of putting all those movies together. So once again, and so if life has purpose, once again, you're in the exact right place and time, in the exact right moment in history where you're supposed to be, to allow us to walk forward into a new timeline and a different future. Somebody set the reset button on that. And God is love, which means that means the ultimate creative force in the universe, the prima mobile of all thought and all power in the universe, is for the greatest and highest good of everything and every being in that universe. And with that, I want to say thanks to Mark Becker and the New Life Expo. I hope I can see in person. I was hoping to be able to fly to Long Island to do this instead of doing this, which is, I think, is a really cheap replica of being able to be in front of you and in front of an audience and get to press the flesh, as we say. So anyway, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Melissa. Thank you to our blue-eyed white Norwegian forest cat Shlu, who's been very lazy lately and is going to get a bath today. So I think that's why he's been avoiding us. So anyway, God bless you all. Infinite blessings to all of you, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Fight on, USC Trojans. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you, Sean.
Hey, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dan.